Hello friends, welcome back to the channel. I'm the GM Philosopher. Welcome back to another episode of GM Philosophy in the Morning. Today we are talking all about how to get better at D&D GM craft starting today. What is GM craft? It is the art of being a game master, the art of running games. And today I have assembled 10 big points. These are big key topics that are really important to know and to understand if you want to become better as a GM. And so if you want to run more awesome games, get better at your craft, and be known by all of your friends as the best GM in the world, then guess what? We're going to go through all of it. We're going to go through all these 10 points. I'm going to share with you the basic fundamentals of each of these points, and I'm going to share some just one-on-one, very straight, raw, experiential advice that will help you take these points a level deeper and make them work even better for your games. You are not going to want to miss this. Let's jump right into it. Boom. All right, so starting off with point number 1, master the core rules and mechanics. Listen, for those of you who are going to be running D&D games, it is important to at least read through the beginning of the player handbook, understand the core mechanics of the game. Now listen, friends, you do not need to be an absolute philosopher on every single page of the player's handbook. You do not have to know how every single ability works, how every single spell works. In fact, if you understand the core mechanics in the very introductory chapters leading up to character creation, and you familiarize yourself with the rules of how skill checks work, ability checks, and how people use spells and abilities, how they use actions and turns and movement, you are going to be okay. But the more solid your knowledge of these things is, the better your players are going to respond. Because listen, the truth of the matter is there are some D&D players out there who care greatly about the rule set you're using. And even if you're not using D&D, if you're using a different system, understanding the rules of that system will earn you the respect of your fellow players. It will also help you to understand exactly what's going on and to arbitrate in a manner that will bring about a resolution that will make players feel better about it. Even if they don't win, it's one way to feel bad about your character losing a battle if it was all up and up and above the board. But if you lose a battle because you didn't get to use your ability the way the rules said, because the GM didn't understand the rules, this can be a very frustrating thing for players. And so one way to avoid this is to just do your best to have a great understanding of the rules. And hey, let me give you a little tip. Let's go a level deeper here. If you do not understand a rule, if you come across a rule, you can approach this in a number of different ways. You can ask your players, hey, does anyone else know how this works? I'm not totally sure how the grapple rules work, or, magic missile, how exactly does it work again? You can ask your players if you need to make a quick decision. One of your players may know exactly how it works, but here's another thing. You don't even have to be 100% right every single time. If you have a theory about how that rule might work and you want to propose your theory, you say, well, hey, I'm not totally sure, but let's run it like this, boom, boom, boom. And then later on, you can go look it up, see if you're right or see if you're wrong, adjust moving forward. Don't feel bad if you need to make common sense calls, maybe make things very simple, reduce it down to kind of common sense. What do you think makes sense for the situation? Even if you're dealing with a rule that maybe has a rule in the book, but you do not know that rule. Maybe it's a niche rule or a little bit outside of the realm of the normal. Hey, that's okay. And then you can make a rule arbitration on that. If players get upset about that, guess what? We're going to be talking about handling player conflicts a little bit later in the video. But hey, don't feel bad also about doing what you need to do to keep gameplay going strong if you don't know every single rule. And hey, that's going to lead us to our second topic, which is enhance your storytelling skills. D&D is a game about storytelling. The players are all telling stories about their characters they've created, these amazing characters at the center of the story. You as the GM are creating the pixels that go around them. But guess what? Even though you are not necessarily creating the story, you're creating the stuff going around them. You're creating the clues, the mysteries, the plot arcs that are going on around the player characters. But guess what? You still need to be a great storyteller. And here's why. Because everything that happens with the player characters, there's going to be two halves to that storytelling experience. On one half, there is the player themselves. They're going to tell the story of their character by acting it out. They're going to decide what their character does with the resources they have available. But then you are responsible for describing the story of how those decisions impact the world you've created, the pixels surrounding the player character. So learning how to be a great storyteller is a fantastic way to increase the quality of your D&D games and make people think, wow, that was such an epic session, instead of having them be like, man, I was kind of bored, or I didn't feel like that session was really impactful. Some ways to get better at this are to improve descriptions of things, improve your description of the door, of the house, of the castle, of the garden, of the moon, of the enemies, whatever it is. Try to get really good at describing in all the five senses. Try to get really good at describing things in a way that will evoke emotion and connection from your player characters, really make things matter to them. And you start this with some really great descriptions, and also describe the way the player characters are interacting with the world, starting off where the player character left off. So the player character might say, hey, I'm going to cast this spell. And you might say, hey, tell me what it looks like. I would like to know the flavor. Maybe they describe it, but they can't necessarily tell you how it would look when it hits the bad guy or when it affects the widget. And so you are going to take that part of the narrative, and you're going to continue it where the player character left off, telling the story of this character's grand exploits as they cast the spell and it hits the bad guy and he flies backwards and breaks through the glass or whatever it is, right? So learning to be a really good storyteller is actually essential. And friends, let's take this a level deeper. Let's talk about how creating an emotionally connecting experience for your players actually is very close to your first objective when you're running games, because they need to be emotionally connected to the game in order to care about it. So how do you make this happen in a storytelling fashion? One of the best ways is when they interact with NPCs, telling the story of the connection. So for example, a person's talking to the person at the tavern. You might say, oh yeah, the ham sandwich is 2 coin, right? But it's like, okay, that's an exchange of information, but then the character might ring you up and then they lower their head. And then the player character might be like, well, what's wrong? What's wrong? Why are you looking sad? And they might say, I just was thinking about my late daughter. She's been missing now for 3 weeks. And when I say late, it's because I fear the worst for her. The ham sandwich was her favorite, right? So it's like these are connecting type of pieces of storytelling. When you tell stories that evoke player emotions, get players invested, get players to be like, I actually care about this. Boom, you have just leveled up your game by going a level deeper, making it even more awesome than it ever was. Fact exchange is one thing. A level deeper is emotional connection. And it leads us to our next point: improve your improvisation abilities. By the way, do you struggle to come up with plot arcs on the fly? If so, I have the perfect tool for you. It is called my Ultimate Plot Randomizer. It is a free ebook. When you join my email list, you can download this for free. You'll get the link in your first email. It contains 4 D100 tables that will let you roll random plot arcs whenever you need them. Roll the hook, the conflict, and the conclusion, and even add wild and wacky stuff all right there. Download this, print it out, add it to your tool collection, and you will never go without another plot arc again. I give this away for free to help you create awesome plot arcs just like I do. I use this in almost every single session, and you are not going to want to miss out on this, so make sure you grab this. So first off, why does improvisation matter for D&D? Well, this is a great question. Here's the reason why. Because you never know what to expect. You can have a story plotted out. You can plot out story arcs. Friend, you can even be running a published adventure, but here's the problem. At some point, I guarantee you, probably within 20 minutes of the beginning of session 1, something is going to happen that you never expected, that you never saw coming. And knowing what to do to continue the storytelling when those unexpected things happen is all has to do with improvisation. Improvisation is the skill that carries you from knowing the story and planning it out to what actually happens, making it flow very smoothly. So let's talk about these improvisation skills. Okay, thinking on your feet, being adaptable during sessions is very important. Not having a straightforward idea about what should happen, but thinking, hey, whatever these players decide to do, I'm going to roll with it and I'm going to continue the storytelling. And let's take this just a little bit of a level deeper. One of the things about improvisation and what it allows you to do is to give ultimate player agency. And guess what? Player agency is a golden currency when you're playing D&D. The reason for this is simply this. Players want to tell the story of their characters. That's the whole point. That's what they value. And when you give them agency to act in a certain way and you don't railroad or you don't limit their options any more than they're limited by the literal physical laws of the universe of your world, guess what happens? Your players get an unlimited budget to shape the destiny of their characters as they see fit. And friend, if you can make this happen, they're going to love your games and they're going to think your games are amazing because it's unfortunate how many times players feel stifled by having agency taken away from them during the experience. And learning how to improv and being able to roll with the punches is great. And let me tell you something, even if you are not a perfect improv master, that does not matter. They are still going to love the fact that you're trying, even if you're throwing wild stuff out there, even if you have to take just a second and say, good one, I was not expecting that. Let me think about how this NPC would respond. Or let me think about how this big bad would respond to this. Let me just take a second and think. This is okay. Sometimes you have to stop for a minute and think because you are not a supercomputer. Well, technically your brain is actually a very powerful supercomputer, but it can only process what it knows so fast. And when it suddenly becomes aware of brand new complex information, sometimes it takes a moment to process. Sometimes you just have to, roll with the punches until you figure out what you're actually going to do. I call this stalling, but sometimes it's a tactic that works a lot. So anyway, improving your improvisation abilities will really help you to crank up those GM skills and then crank down the odds of your players not enjoying the session. And that brings us to actually tip number 4, which is to foster player engagement. So you can have the most immersive world. You can have the greatest storytelling skills. You can have the best group of players ever. But listen, if they're not engaged in the game is not going to flow super well. It's not going to be very fun. So what we need to do is connect our awesome players to our awesome game world, to the awesome experience of role-playing in that immersive environment. And there are a few different ways to go about this. I'm going to tell you what, the very first thing is to encourage role play and to not only encourage it, but to prompt it. So getting players engaged often means you use your NPCs, you use the other characters in the world, you even use the environment, and you even use the big bad, but it works better when it's actually reasoning, communicating things in the game, talking. So it's really hard to engage players with inanimate objects. It works a lot better with like NPCs and stuff. But what you're going to want to do is prompt role play, prompt them a little bit, give them great opportunities for role play. And then even if they have a little bit of trouble connecting with it, sometimes you have to experiment a little bit and you have to figure out what is going to get them to role play with me, right? Asking players to force it when they're not feeling it is not going to work. What we want to do is experiment until we find the perfect combination of factors that are going to get them to just explode onto the role play scene. So there is stuff that's going to get their attention, stuff that's going to get them interested, stuff that's going to get them really wanting to interact with it. And they'll just be like chomping at the bit to interact with your game world. What is it? This is a good question. And figuring that out will help you to foster that engagement. Another thing is to really give players space to role play, give them space to engage. Sometimes the pacing here matters a lot. Don't pace super fast. Make sure that you don't just sit around forever not doing anything, but give your players ample time to open up, to engage with the environment, to do things that their characters would like to do. And once again, I'm going to take this just a level deeper. When we are trying to foster greater engagement, one of the best things we can do is to get them emotionally invested in the story, in the NPCs, in the big bad, in whatever it is. If you can get them to care about an element of the game very much. A lot of times this happens with pets. A lot of times this happens with like core NPCs. And sometimes this happens with the big bad. They come to care, maybe not in like they love the big bad, want to save them, but they're so driven by maybe revenge or a sense of justice that they want to defeat the big bad. And so if you can get them to emotionally care, that's going to foster a lot of engagement. And that's part of the trick, actually. And that leads us to the next part, which is very tied to this, which is tip number 5, develop rich world building. Now, what does it mean to build a rich world? Well, this means a few things. I think starting off with a map is really important. I think understanding not only the local situation, the local geography, what is around. This is very important. Are there villages here? Is there a city? If so, what kind of city is it? Or is there a forest? What's in that forest? Is there any water? Is there oceans or rivers? But then also the expanded world state. What kind of creatures live on this continent? What's going on this landmass? So there's the environmental aspect of it. There's the mapping aspect of it. But then there's also the living world, the breathing world. What NPCs are they going to encounter? What adventures are they going to encounter? What kind of problems might they walk into? Listen, one of the great things about thinking about your game as a sandbox is this. Stuff exists in your world. So create your world, figure out what's happening, And then your player characters are going to go into it. Listen, a lot of times the very best role play world states are not world states that are like generating world states. In other words, they don't just generate around your characters to fit the character narrative. Your characters are walking into a world that has things going. This feels more real. So the local scene with the sheriff facing off against these bandits, this is going to happen with or without the characters. But if the characters get involved, it becomes the main storyline and it gets way more interesting and someone's going to see it because the existential fourth wall, the camera that's watching everything, which is the vision of you and your group as you play the game, it is watching this play out. And so when you develop a world state that feels real, the players are going to respond to it better. How do you make it feel more real? You make it feel more real by giving it character and giving it a living, breathing ecosystem. And then when players walk into that, there's already stuff going on. There's already situations going on. There are already big bads. There are already serious situations, fun situations. There's fun NPCs. There are animals. There are trees. There's magic, treasure, loot. Hey, real quick, are you tired of rolling the same old dungeon loot using the same old methods time after time, game after game? Well, I have a solution for you. This is how I roll all of my dungeon loot now. It's a book I created called The Ultimate Dungeon Loot Randomizer. This book contains 10 massive D100 tables full of awesome dungeon loot. Roll on a table for mundane items, slightly magical dungeon items, mundane weapons and armor, magical weapons and armor, individual pieces of treasure, magic scrolls, potions and elixirs, cursed items, forgotten wonders and otherworldly relics, and even full chests of treasure and loot. This book is now available on my Blurb bookstore in 3 different versions. There's a hardcover option, a softcover option that's more affordable, and a super affordable digital ebook option. It's even system agnostic, meaning you can use it with any fantasy TTRPG system, and you can just adapt it to the rule set you're using. Link is in the description. Don't miss out. Grab it today. There are all kinds of things going on, but how those things respond to the presence of your player characters, and then how your player characters react to that stimulation and how the story develops. Well, hey, guess what? That is why you're playing the game, and that's the whole point of it. Now, you do not have to get super, super deep with this. And you know what? Let me take you a level deeper when it comes to developing rich world building, something that I think about a lot. And here's what it all comes down to for me. What is going to get characters' attention? What is going to pique their curiosity? And then I blend that with what's actually going on in the world. Okay. So I have a situation going on in the world. I know, for example, that like I'm running a campaign setting for my Discord group right now, and it's a haunting in a small village. So I know there's a haunting going on. I know the backstory of this, but then what do I want to think about when I'm building this world state? I want to think about, okay, there's this character here and there's this character here. Now I want to make it rich. I want to really bring my players into it. So I'm going to give them some interesting characteristics. I want to give them some really interesting mannerisms, some interesting philosophies about life. I want to make them act quirky in strange ways, maybe make one of them very attractive in this way, but then they have this downside, maybe make them need the party or desire the party for some reason. Maybe they desire help or aid or romance, or they desire to be saved, or they desire to pickpocket someone, whatever it is. And I make these interesting connections, and then the players walk right into that when they're going into my world state. And to me, this is the core of what developing rich world building is about. Okay. Now that brings us right to tip number 5, which falls right in line with this, which is design memorable NPCs. All right. Now, creating amazing NPCs is one of my favorite things in the world. I love NPCs. In fact, designing memorable NPCs is probably, I would say, the thing that I think I'm best at and the thing that I love the most about D&D. I love NPCs so much. And I could talk for 17 hours about this. So either this is going to become a 17-hour video, or I'm going to give you a more limited scope. So let's talk about 2 things. Let's talk about a number 1 tip, and then let's go a level deeper about designing memorable NPCs. So let's start off with what I think is the best tip. That is, don't pass up an opportunity to make an NPC interesting. Okay. Now, and this actually goes a level deeper, and I am not coming to my level deeper tip yet, but going a level deeper just on this tip. You have an NPC. What is the purpose of NPCs? Well, a lot of times they do 2 things. They just kind of like act out their life, and they supply information. So this is the most basic NPC. And a lot of times there's nothing super unique or memorable about NPCs who are in this type of role. So we always want to add stuff that's going to make the NPC a little bit more memorable. So instead of it just being a boy with short hair who says, "Thank you, sir," when he gets tipped for taking the horse to the stable, we say, "Little boy, his name is Timmy. He has short hair. It looks kind of choppy. It looks like he maybe cut himself. And, you're not sure, but you think he's a little cross-eyed. But he holds his hand out as if he wants a tip." Right. And then so you say maybe, "Well, I'm going to give him 2 coppers." So he takes it and then he looks at it and looks back up at you and he says, "Sir, I thought you were a rich man or a rich lady," whatever it is, man or lady. "I thought you were rich. 2 coppers seems like a small bit. I'm awfully hungry." And he holds up his hand a little bit more, right? So all of a sudden, we've made this a little bit more interesting. Like, right, there's the haircut thing and the cross-eyed, but then Timmy he's like, what is he doing? Does he think he deserves more, or is it like a begging thing, or is he trying to get more tips out of like a sales pitch? Like, what is he doing? So it's like, this is interesting. How are the players going to react to this? This is going to take them a little bit by surprise. They're probably just expecting to tip him and be done, right? So we're making it a little interesting. We're adding a dimension to it. And maybe if they say, "I want to roll an insight check about this," we're going to say that they roll an insight check. And here's what I'm going to say, "So you notice right away something about Timmy that you did not notice before. He has a number tattooed right below his ear on the right side of his neck. What is the number? Well, it's in Dwarven, and it says 27. Is Timmy a dwarf? No. Timmy is definitely a human. So now this is a little more interesting. The plot thickens, right? Taking NPCs in an interesting direction that's going to engage player attention. I love to do this way more than not. You don't have to do this all the time. If you try to do this with every single NPC, you'll bog down your campaign with really interesting side arcs. But we want to do it sometimes. A good rule of thumb is to do it once or twice every session, sometimes even more. Now let's go a level deeper with it. I often like to create situations where my NPCs shock my players a little bit. Now, I don't try to do this all the time. Again, once per session maybe, sometimes once every other session. Why is Timmy tattooed with the number 27 in Dwarven? Maybe the players will say, "Hey, what's that tattoo from, Timmy?" "Oh, well, sir, when I was younger, some people took me away and put me to work in the dark place. I worked in the dark place for the big red guys, and then when they would blow the whistle, I would eat my food, and if I didn't work hard enough, they would hit me, whoop, 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 and then they put this on me, and that was my name when I lived in the dark place. Can I have 2 more copper for putting your horse up, sir?" Right? So it's like, what is going on now? What is going on, right? But it's like, throw in a little something that's going to shock the players to really make them be like, what is going on here? Anyway, I love making NPCs memorable in that way. Now, with that being said, we're going to take our next tip in a slightly different direction. And we're going to talk about tip number 7, balance combat and role play. All right. When it comes to balancing combat and role play, there are really 2 things we're going to talk about. Once again, we're going to share a general tip here, and then I'm going to take it a level deeper, okay? So the first general tip is design battles that are challenging and fun, but make sure that there is role play involved in them. And here's what I mean by that. One thing that you kind of probably want to stay away from is having a player character say, "Oh, is it my turn? Okay, I'm going to swing with my longsword." And then you say, "Roll to hit," and they roll. And they tell you what they got. And then you say, "Oh, you hit them. Roll damage." They roll damage. "All right, very good. Do you want to do anything else for your turn?" "No, I think that's it." "All right, very good. Player 2. Now, sometimes, and during, I would say, probably 50% of the battle, that is how turns will go. But we don't want that to be the only way turns will go. What we want to do is we want to balance the combat and the role play, right? So in addition to making balanced encounters, and in addition to making the fights, the combat fun and interesting, and letting players have agency and letting them be creative, we also want to make sure that there's some role play included in this. And here's why. Players like to feel connected to their characters, and when we're talking about envisioning what's going on, we want the players to have ample opportunity to describe what exactly it is that their characters are doing, how it looks, so that everyone else can enjoy it, and for the player to enjoy the process of explaining it. So you might say, You hit him. Roll or describe what it looks like when you swing your longsword at the enemy. Everyone listen. Like, what does it look like? And then you let them describe it, and then you carry on that description by saying, yes, your blade does hit the orc, and he bounces back and he rubs his arm's blood running down the side of his arm, and he just looks angry, draws another dagger. Now he has 2 daggers, right? So we're role playing a little bit as we do combat. This makes combat's way more intense, way more fun. Now let's take this level deeper. Let's go a little bit deeper with this. I want to ensure that fights always advance plot and character development. Okay. So when you're having a fight, it's not just a fight. We want to also advance the story. We want to advance the narrative. So what does that mean? What I want to do is I want to give every single player character a moment where they either learn something about themselves, or they learn something about the enemy, or they advance the storyline in some other way, whether it be pulling a lever or realizing something about an item or seeing something in the distance, whatever it is. At least once per combat, I want every single player character to advance the story in some way. So for example, when I was playing with my Discord group not too long ago, they were battling they were battling a demon. I don't want to give away too much because I'm going to publish some more content about this very soon. but one of them realized that there was blood left on the ground, but it was sizzling after the fight. And it was sizzling and starting to boil away into vapor. And so they quickly captured some of it to put in a vial. And when they put it in the vial, they realized it was still boiling, but it was no longer escaping, and thus it did not disappear. And now, this was slightly after combat, but they realized it during combat. They just didn't have the time to stop and collect it. They wanted to finish the fight first, which is very understandable, seeing as how it was an intense fight. With that being said, this gave that player character something to do that would advance the story, right? Now, they were great because they looked for the blood, but what if they hadn't looked for it? Well, it would have been good for me to prompt them to say, hey, roll me a perception check. You notice there's blood on the ground and it's sizzling, right? Everyone loves to maybe look for something that could help to be an alchemical component for some kind of weapon later. And this was a prime candidate, blood from a creature of the abyss. And so this is this great example of how you take that level deeper, make sure that every player character gets to advance the storyline, advance the plot, advance character development during every battle. Why make battles about battles and roleplay about roleplay? Let's do some roleplay during the battles too, right? And that leads us to our next tip, which is plan and pace your sessions. Now, there's an interesting relationship between planning and pacing your sessions, okay? You do want to plan out your sessions, and here's what I do for planning. I obviously plan out the area. There's a map. I plan out the local terrain. So there's a static preparation that comes from the environment, okay? But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about planning the plot, planning the story. So what I do is I generally plan one combat or in-depth role-play encounter. And then I plan a series of 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 minor objectives and goals that I want to have for myself as the player's roleplay. So one of them might be like, you sight a ghost, which is like a precursor to another encounter later. And maybe another one is they get approached by this certain NPC. And then maybe another one is they find a certain clue if they investigate the murder or whatever, right? So I make a list of things for myself that I don't want to forget. But then pacing the sessions. How do we do this, okay? Now, when it comes to pacing, this is very important. We want to keep track of time. There's a good reason for having a list of goals because this tells us what we need to get done. And we know we have so much time to get it all done in. We also know that there's a combat to fit in there, right? So we kind of have a general idea. What we don't want to do is make too many goals, too many combats. If we try to do too much, we're going to either end up not getting it all done or we're going to be pushing the players too fast. We have to allow time for role play. So for me, it's unbalanced. Sometimes I have 2 goals for my sessions. Sometimes I have 4 goals, 5 goals. But if I have 5 goals, generally it's in the earlier part of the campaign, like maybe session 1. For example, I had 5 goals in session 1 of the 5-session arc that I'm running with my Discord group. But by the time we get to session 4, I'm going to have like 2 goals. Why? Because we've already laid so much groundwork and the rest is going to be role play. The player characters are taking on the pacing. But now how do I do that? Let's go a level deeper, friends. Let's talk about how to pace things that are being player driven. Because as GMs, we want to have some basic parameters, but we want to let the players navigate, dictate, drive the storyline. Okay, so how do we do this? What we do is we give them ample time in every scene to role play and to discover and to do the things they want to do. And we give them a little bit more time, just a little bit more. We want to make sure we don't push them. Wait until an awkward silence develops, and then wait a little bit longer. Right? And then you might say as a GM, okay, so now, here we are. You guys are standing in the tavern or wherever it is, right? And you can be like, does anyone want to do anything else? If not, just let me know what you'd like to do next, right? And then sometimes there's a very obvious thing, like there's a person who wants them to follow them. They want to show them something. So it's like, do you want to follow so-and-so? If so, just let me know. Or does anyone not want to do that in Youre? But we want to let players drive the sessions. But here's what you have to be careful about. If you don't kind of move things along and you don't have any super proactive players, you can stall out and spend the whole session in just like one room kind of meandering, which is not a bad thing if that's what the game is about. But a lot of times players do want to accomplish more than that, but they just might not feel empowered enough, motivated enough to take that initiative to push the narrative. So as a GM, you can take that role, but you just want to make sure you have plenty of time for everyone to do the things they want to do. And friends, I'll tell you, sometimes I struggle with this. Sometimes I start thinking, hey, let's get this going, because I don't want my players to feel like it's boring or that there's nothing going on. I like to keep things happening kind of quick, but if I go too quick, then they don't have the chances for that in-depth role play or to do everything they want to do. One player might be reading over their abilities, and it might take them 3 minutes to decide if they want to try to make that perception check, because they're trying to figure out if their character either has an ability that'll help, or maybe they're even trying to figure out if their character would know or care enough. And this is the important part of the role play for the player characters. So I want to take that all into account in the plan and pacing part of it. Okay, now let's move on to tip number 9, handling challenges and conflicts. So there are a couple different things to talk about in this tip. Managing player conflicts is one of them. Now, hopefully you do not have too many player conflicts at your table, players disagreeing about things, players having conflicts with each other. However, learning how to handle this if it does happen can save you a ton of awkwardness, because let me tell you something. I have had, probably dozens of player conflicts at my tables over the past 2 decades of running games, and handling it well is so much better than not knowing how to handle it and having it kind of spiral or just take over the game. Ideally, what you want is to be able to handle it in a way where kind of like everyone stays calm and you get it taken care of. You can move on with the game and have a good time. And let me tell you, sometimes some of the most common conflicts that can arise are you have players who may be rules lawyers and they try to rules lawyer other players. Sometimes they try to rules lawyer you as a GM. They may get mad because a certain ruling you made affects the game in a certain way that they don't like, or they might feel like other players shouldn't get away with the things they're getting away with. Now, there is a certain type of tabletop gamer who gets mad about these things, who gets upset about these things. One might ask themselves, why would players, get mad about this? Because it's a cooperative game, unless you're playing like a evil characters trying to one up each other or kind of thing. You would ask yourself, why would people do this? And it's because some people get so serious about the game that it actually high key makes them angry if other people aren't following the rules that they themselves feel like need to be followed. And this can be a very tricky thing. And let me just tell you, maintaining a positive table environment is really important, and not letting that negativity affect the game for the other players, the players who are here to play a cooperative game, who don't really care that much about strict adherence to the rules, who want to see their teammates succeed at cool things. These are the kind of players who are going to be the backbone of your game. And so those rules lawyerish players, or the troublemakers, the ones who cause conflict to the game, these are the players who you kind of have to watch out for. And sometimes, I hate to say it, but knowing when to kind of walk away from these types of situations is maximally important. Now let's take this a level deeper. I'm going to tell you my most baseline serious thing, and this is just the truth of it. This is the truth of it. There are times when keeping the peace and having a positive gaming experience and having people get along, having people trust each other with kindness and respect, treat each other with kindness and respect, this is way more important than even depth of immersion or role play. I have noticed that these super serious D&D players, sometimes the ones who cause the most conflict, are also some of the deepest role players. And they play these really epic characters who do great things for the story, but Let me tell you one thing right now, friends. It is not worth the conflict if it comes with conflict. I don't want some hardcore D&D person coming in and just steamrolling all of my good-natured fun players because those players are not meeting some standard that this person has. And so handling challenges and conflicts really requires us to be kind of like leadership figures, arbitrators, but also sometimes we have to keep the peace. We have to be the person who's willing to kind of step in on behalf of our players who are just here to have a good time if someone's trying to start a conflict with them. And that can be so difficult, but it is an important part of succeeding as a GM and honing your GM craft to be the very best GM you can possibly be. And that leads us to our 10th tip. This tip might sound common sense, but we cannot say it enough. And that is commit to continuous learning. Continuously learning how to be a better GM is something that never stops. GM craft is an interesting thing in the sense that it is a lifelong endeavor. A lot of times people who become GMs are lifelong GMs. And it's really interesting. And this is definitely something that's true for me in my life. When we stop trying to learn and we think we know it all, that's when we are setting ourselves up for the biggest, probably frustrations, not only for us, but for our players. Listen, as a GM, you want to be kind to yourself, but it's also really important to understand, hey, every single week I could learn one new thing that's going to help me run better games for my players. Sometimes we seek feedback from our players for this. Sometimes this means learning from others. You watching this video is a perfect example of this. You've probably heard at least 1, 2, 3 things watching this video that have at least caused you to be inspired to make some positive changes in your own gaming at your own table, but also experimentation, because not every group is the same. Trying new things with different people, trying new things with your group. I might tell you something that I do at my table, and you might go try it at your table, and your players might think, oh, that's amazing. Or they may say, that doesn't really work for us. Understanding that difference is also important because every group is a little different. And knowing what's good for your group is a whole deeper level than knowing what is good in general as a GM. And let me just go a level deeper with this. Let me just take that previous thought and go a little bit further. Knowing what is good for your group is going to require you to communicate with your group. So communicating with your players about how to make the game better is some of the best communication you could ever have. And let me just tell you that if a player is brave enough, bold enough to tell you what they would like to see more of, it would certainly be in your best interest to listen to them and then try your best to incorporate that even once in the next session. You do not realize how much that might mean to your players, how much that might enhance the game for them, make your game so much better for them by giving them the role play experience they are hoping to have at your table. This could make you into the type of GM that they never want to stop gaming with. And that is really the truth of it. And with that being said, that is going to conclude my video on how to get better at D&D GM craft starting today. Listen, friends, if you commit yourself to taking some bits of information from this video, the ones that you think would work good for your party, and then incorporating them, or maybe if this has even inspired you to think a little bit deeper about some things you're already working on, then my job is done. And I hope that this has happened, because what I want is for every GM to have a better experience out there, for every GM to feel that empowerment, that positivity that comes from knowing that their players love their games and want to keep gaming at their table. With that being said, that's all I have to say on this one. Thank you so much for coming back for another episode of GM Philosophy in the Morning. I'm here every single day creating videos about the best game in the world, D&D. So I will see you awesome people on the next one.